I love efficiency. I don't know how you make it through your life and the rhythms of your life, but for me, I have a particular penchant towards efficiency, towards things having a place, towards things working in the right order, in the right way, to things having a sort of a rhythm. I haven't always been like this, actually. It's been something there have been a few things in my life that have been sort of developing over the last, a decade that have been leading me towards this, but especially moving to New York 4.5 or so years ago, coming back here, there's just so much about the city that is loud and stressful and out of control that especially in the rhythms of my life and like the rhythms of my apartment, I have like now just a high need and a high degree for efficiency, for things to have a place, to the things be in order, to things work in a certain way. And there's a little bit for me where that's about like alleviating stress, having order in a certain situation because like everything else is disorder. I don't know if any of the rest of you can relate to that. Some of it is just about productivity. It's about not having enough time in the day to be able to say like I can deal with a bunch of disorder over here. It's like there's only a certain amount of time and I got to get things done. And there are a couple different ways that this manifests for me. But in terms of the rhythms of my life, one of the ways that it manifests is in this thing called while I'm out. While I'm out. You're heading out to do something, and then all this list of stuff comes into your mind where you're like, oh, while I'm out, I'm going to do that. While I'm out, I'm going to stop there. While I'm out, there's this thing that I needed to take care of, right? While I'm out. There are a couple different versions of while I'm out. There's a first-person plural version called while we're out, right? Where you're with someone else, and you're like, while we're out. There's a really delightful version called while you're out. And while you're out is actually the best version because it's super efficient, and I'm not doing any of the work. So I don't have time to deep dive this, but while you're out is the best. But, while I'm out or while we're out, and there are things that are fine about this and wonderful and productive. It makes us able to get things done. Sure, it sort of hangs different tasks like lights on a string. Wonderful. And we're just going to add more little lights along the way. Perfect. There's some things that are obviously negative about this. Like every walk becomes a job. Right? It's like there's no enjoyment anymore because everything is, I could do that thing while I'm out. And so everything that I'm doing becomes a task arena instead of a peace and joy arena. I also can use this to economize other people. Other people become means to an ends of getting my stuff done. We, of course, very ironically are in a holiday season where we see that happening all the time, where everyone's out running around doing the business of their holiday stuff, running over other people along the way to getting these things done. And what is at the end of the day this about for me? While I'm out, while we're out, or I already said that, while you're out, what is this really about? It's really underneath about my desire to be inconvenienced as little as possible. It's about my desire to not be inconvenienced. It's about my desire to just have an incredibly convenient, orderly, easily put together life and arrangements of my life and hours and time and minute and day to just to be inconvenienced as little as possible. We hate being inconvenienced. We hate feeling like things come in from the outside just wrecking our schedule or upsetting our day or, oh my gosh, I've told that person to do it that way 1,000,000 times. Why do I have to tell you a minute and first time? And every single time these things come up for us, the thing that's really on the table is I hate being inconvenienced. And God so often is viewed by us as an incredible inconvenience. God is just so dramatically inconvenient. God is like, give me your time with this prayer thing that is like totally out of your control and feels like it never regularly works the way you want it to. Just shockingly inconvenient. Or read this book. Read this book that has some things in it that are going to be difficult to understand. Read this book that's written by people in a different time, in a different place from you. So you're going to have to actually do some work. Like the Bible doesn't just come and just like sit right in your lap and it's not like a children's book. It's not like God walked down the road and good things happen. It's a little more complicated than that. There's challenges because God is like complicated in some ways. And so we're interacting with him and we're just going, God, why are you just such an inconvenience to us at times? We often view God as a major inconvenience. And so it's very, very tempting for us to interact with God in a while I'm out kind of way. Like along the way, I'll sort of fit the God thing in. When it's convenient for me, I'll fit the God thing in. When I'm in an incredible moment of need and I don't know where else to turn, I'll fit the God thing in. Although it's really amazing that God is often so gracious when we come to him in that last particular moment to meet our needs anyways. So often we're just trying to fit God in along the way. While I'm out, I'll maybe stop by the God booth and get my dose of some sort of faith-filled religious thing. But we really don't want to interact with God in a way that inconveniences us. And the world has just been viewing God for some time as just a general annoyance, as a big inconvenience. Some sort of force that's out there that makes demands of me and tells me what I should and shouldn't do and all this sort of stuff. And so we just view God as this big, inconvenient entity. But the Bible actually says that our lives are full of inconvenience, not because God is inconvenient, but because I am inconvenient. Because I have things about myself and my nature and the way that I act and the way that I view other people and the way that I am in the world that are profoundly inconvenient. And it actually is not God who is inconveniencing us. It is us who inconveniences God. And thank God that God is a God who is okay with being inconvenienced. Today is the first Sunday of Advent, and Advent is the Latin word for coming, where we're looking forward to the coming of Jesus Christ on Christmas Day, when God left the comfort of heaven to enter into this fallen time and place to meet his people and to save them. And this Advent, I want to look at a handful of scriptures that speak about the ways in which people receive Jesus. Because, when we think about the Christmas season and we think about Advent, we get all these warm, fuzzy feelings. Christmas, Advent, wonderful. We love celebrating it, whatever. But the reality is that there are very, very few people who are actually concerned at all with welcoming and receiving God. That is the witness of humanity across time, and it is the clear witness of the scriptures. God shows up to people in the world, to people in the past, and to people now, even though those people are not really concerned about receiving him at all. Advent, even though we're sort of marking it together as we go step by step, we're trying to move the ship in a different direction and say we're going to welcome God. Even though we're trying to do that, the reality is that we are not very good at welcoming God. There are a handful of ways that we don't welcome God at all. And so Jesus is entering into a world all the time that doesn't give him the time of day, doesn't care about him, that's not looking for him, that's not treating him well. And so we're actually going to look this Advent season about from a couple different places in Scripture where people just really couldn't be bothered with Jesus. Where Jesus came to them. They had an advent of God's Son, and people just really couldn't be bothered to receive him. I've titled this little mini sermon series, No One Cared About This King. Today we're going to be in Luke chapter 17, verses 11 to 19. Again, that's Luke 17, verses 11 to 19. And I've titled today's sermon, No One Cared That Jesus Healed Them. If you have a scripture, if you have a Bible, have a scripture. If you have a Bible, you can turn to the passage. Luke's the third book of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke. I'll read the text aloud. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was passing along between Samaria and Galilee. And as he entered a village, he was met by 10 lepers who stood at a distance and lifted up their voices, saying, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. When he saw them, he said to them, Go and show yourselves to the priests. And as they went, they were cleansed. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. And he fell on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks. Now he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus answered, Were not 10 cleansed? Where are the 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? And he said to him, Rise and go your way. Your faith has made you well. We care a lot about getting what we want in our lives. And when we are clear about something that we want, we show up in a certain way to make it clear to ourselves and to everyone around us that we want that thing. We make our desire known. And these people in this text make their desire known in this passage to Jesus and the people around them. Let's look again at Luke 17, 12 and 13. It says, "And as he, Jesus, entered a village, he was met by 10 lepers who stood at a distance and lifted up their voices saying, 'Jesus, Master, have mercy on us.'" A couple things that I want to point out about these verses. First of all, the text says 10 lepers. I did a sermon on this question a couple months ago now, where I deep dived a little bit on what leper really means here. You maybe have a picture of what a leper is. Actually here, the word looks more generally at skin diseases. Anyways, you can go back and find that sermon. I deep dive it there. But what we're really talking about here is maybe someone who has classic leprosy, like you know what you've got in your mind, the numbness in the fingers and all that sort of stuff, and maybe digits falling off. This also could just be a skin disease generally, which the issue with the skin disease is that it makes them ritually impure, and so they can't be present in the community. They have to be outside of the community. So you can think leper here. You also can just think 10 people who had a skin disease, and as a result, they're ritually impure, and they're cast out from the community until those skin diseases are healed. And these people are showing up to Jesus, making their desire for healing heard. They want something, and so they're responding to that want in a certain way, making it clear. And there are two things that they're doing to make it particularly clear. They're showing up physically, and they're showing up vocally to communicate their desire. Right? They're showing up to Jesus physically, and they're standing at a distance. They're showing up in their bodies saying, "Hey, I want this thing." Now, the fact that they're standing at a distance is important because they're ritually impure because of their skin disease. They would have known that they were not supposed to get close to anybody else. So they're getting as close as they can to him, meeting Jesus as he's coming into the village. So Jesus is coming into the village, and they're rushing out there to the edge, getting as close as they can, but keeping a proper distance, saying like, "Hey, I'm physically here. Like, look at me. I have this desire. I'm getting as close as I can. I'm not supposed to be trying to get close to anybody, so I'm standing off at a distance, but you can see in what I'm doing with my body, how I'm physically present, that I have a particular desire." They're not just showing up physically to reflect that desire, they're also showing up vocally. They are lifting up their voice. The Greek here says they raised a voice. It's interesting. The word voice here is in the singular, even though it's a plural noun. There are multiple people with skin diseases there, and yet it says they raised up a voice, which maybe is communicating that they like had a common, right? You know how we talk about that, like the people, right? The people raised up their voice, right? The people had one voice in common. They spoke with one voice. These people here are speaking with one voice to say to Jesus, "Have mercy on us." Right? And so they're vocally present, and they're crying out to him to make it clear that they have a want that they desire Jesus to meet. And we do the same simple, obvious thing when we have desires in our lives, when we have wants in our lives. We show up in these two ways. We show up physically, and we show up vocally to make it known what we want and what we desire. And we do this over and over and over again. What are the sorts of things that you want? How do you show up for them physically? You go and stand in line for that thing that you want to buy or for the tickets that you want to get. We show up to be around the people that we want to be around, right? I mean, people like that we know, that we have relationships with, we show up for them physically. We might have like a celebrity or a sports figure that we are particularly enamored with. And so when they are like near or present, you might find that you're willing to go and be in places physically you wouldn't normally go to in order to be close to them. And every time that we do those sorts of things in our bodies, what we're saying physically is, "I want this thing." And we're saying it in a way such that everyone can see it. We also show up vocally. We express our desires. We do this in a number of different ways, maybe more directly in some situations, maybe more indirectly in other situations. We sort of like drop hints to people. You know, we maybe say things that sort of, you know, we're like doing inception to them. You know, I'm going to like put this idea in your mind, or I'm going to, you know, subtly manipulate you. Or maybe even if it's a little bit more direct, we still show up and encourage people to be thinking about our own wants and desires. I want this thing. I have a hope for this thing. And so we show up over and over again in our wants physically and vocally to get the things that we want to get, to achieve the things that we want to achieve, to satisfy the desires that we want to be satisfied. There is, however, a particular incongruity here in the way that we do this. Because when we are showing up in a situation, physically or vocally, like that for something that we want, there's something going on in the background that is implicitly true that we try to ignore as much as possible, which is this: we are obviously not able to get that thing on our own. Somebody else has to help us. Someone, somewhere, somehow is helping us get that thing. If we were able to get it on our own, we wouldn't need to show up. We could just have it come to us. If we could get it on our own, we wouldn't need to talk about it. We could have it come to us. But we need help to get the things that we want in these situations. And so there's always some sort of personal mediator, like that's present in between me and me getting the thing that I want. And the challenge is this, the incongruity is this. We often interact in those situations in a way that clearly shows how much we care about getting the thing that we want. And yet at the same time, we act in such a way that shows that we care almost not at all about the people who are helping us get what we want. Our physical and vocal presence in these situations says at one and the same time, I really care about that thing, and I don't care about that person at all. We care so much about getting the things that we want in our lives, but so often we do not care at all about the people who are helping us get the things that we want. We see an example in this passage of a man who was grateful for the person who gave him the thing that he wanted. Let's look at his response in Luke 17:15-16. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice, and he fell on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks. Now he was a Samaritan. These two things that we do when we have a desire for something, being physically present, being vocally present, this man does, again, to Jesus to show his thankfulness for something. Right? He shows up and gives Jesus his physical presence. He comes back, right? So there was somewhere else he could have gone first, but the first place that he chose to go to instead was to go back to Jesus to communicate with his physical presence, his thankfulness and gratitude for the person who got him the thing that he wanted. Not only did he come back, but he got physically close to Jesus. This is like the first person that he's ever, since he had the skin disease come upon him, he has not been able to be voluntarily physically close to anyone except for other people with skin diseases. This is the first person that he's chosen to get physically close to, right? Do you see what's happening here? It's like Jesus gave him a gift of healing. And the first thing that man did with that gift was to come back and show Jesus how grateful he was for it. He's not just saying thank you for the gift, he's using the gift to say thank you for the gift. He's saying, you gave me the gift of being able to be close to other people again, and the first thing I'm going to do with that gift is get close to you to thank you because you're the one who gave me the gift. He's not just physically present, he's vocally present. He shows up with a voice, and not just with a voice, with a loud voice. The use of the word voice here in verses 15 and 16 parallels the voice that was raised up by these people with the skin diseases in verses 12 and 13. They raised up a voice to call out to Jesus, and then here this man raises up a voice. But he doesn't just raise up a voice, he raises up now a loud voice. Right? Back in verse 12 and 13, it was just they raised up a voice. This man raises up a loud voice. In other words, the voice of his thanksgiving was louder than the voice of his desire. The voice of his desire, he raised it up and made it known. But when he came back to say thank you, he thanks God with a loud voice. He thanks God with a greater voice than the voice that he used to ask for the thing that he wanted. What is revealed in this man's physical presence? What's revealed in his vocal presence? it is revealed that he doesn't just care about the thing that he wanted, he cares about the person who gave him and gifted him that thing. Jesus tells this man as a result that his faith has made him well. And yet, it's not really this man's thankfulness that is striking to Jesus in the passage. It's the lack of thankfulness from everybody else that is striking to Jesus, and really is what this passage is about, is what makes this passage unique. What grabs Jesus' attention is not the right response of this man's thankfulness, it's the fact that nobody else came back to thank him. Let's look at what Jesus has to say about the lack of thankfulness from these other people. Luke 17:18 says this, "Then Jesus answered," interesting word to use there, but it's saying Jesus responded to this man's thankfulness with this question. Then Jesus answered, "Were not 10 cleansed? Where are the 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" I love Jesus' response here. It's like, it's a little tongue-in-cheek here. He's like, did the other guys not get healed? Like, did it not work for anybody else? I mean, you were healed on the way. Nobody else must have gotten healed. That's what happened here. It failed for everybody else. That's why, wasn't everybody cleansed? Where then is everybody else? And what is Jesus looking for? Is he looking for some shocking display of gratitude? Is he looking for religious self-flagellation? I just can't believe you would deign, Jesus, to do this to lowly little old me. What is he looking for here? He's looking for the same simple things that people did to express their desire, that they would use them to express their thanks. He's looking for their physical presence, and he's looking for their vocal presence. What does he say? He says, was no one found to return, to just show up in their body? They showed up in their body to say, I want something. Can anyone show up in their body to say thank you? What's he looking for? And to give praise. They showed up in their voices to say, I've got a request. Can anyone show up with their voice to say, thank God for meeting my request? That's all he's looking for. Just the same stuff that we do and that God asks us and invites us to do when we have a need, to do them back, to say thanks when the need is met. What does this reveal about these other 9 who do not come back to say thank you to Jesus and to give thanks to God? It reveals what they really cared about. They don't care about the person who was able to meet their need. They just care about getting the thing that they want. They just cared about getting what they wanted. In some ways, that's not even really caring about being healed. Being healed is just a subsidiary thing that will allow them now to get back to whatever it is that they actually want to be spending their time on. They just want to get back to their regularly scheduled programming. Oh, this skin disease thing was a real bummer detour, but now that it's fixed, I got places to be. I got things to do. I had a plan for my life. I had a plan for my day. I can get back now onto the plan, and I don't want to be inconvenienced by anything else, having to return. Oh, it's so out of the way. Can you imagine having to go back to the opening of the village? Oh, it's so far. So far, the priest's temple is the priests are way over here. Oh my gosh, I can't do any of it. So now, yay, this minor inconvenience is over. I get to go back to the way that I wanted things to be. That's all these people care about. They don't care about the person who looked at them and had mercy on them and saw their situation. And let's be clear, probably also saw that they were not going to thank him for it and healed them anyways. This revelation is about a number of things. This revelation about what they really cared about. But it's at least about not wanting to be inconvenienced. About wanting to live a life where I just get to move from one convenience to the next, over and over and over again. Things easily within reach. Things taking the time I wanted them to take. Going to someplace one time and getting the job done and never having to go back again. just convenience over and over and over again. Things being as easy for me as possible. You know, Jesus heals these people in a way that's incredibly convenient for them. I don't know if you noticed in verse 14, it says, when he saw them, he said to them, go and show yourselves to the priest. And as they went, they were cleansed. As they went, they were cleansed. So Jesus doesn't heal them and then they go and show themselves to the priest, right? The priest situation, the priests are the people. They have a Levitical duty. Leviticus describes this in great detail. They have a Levitical duty to inspect these skin diseases and to pronounce someone clean or unclean. So when Jesus is telling them to go show themselves to the priest, he's saying, go to the place of verification of your healing, which is interesting because he hasn't healed them yet. So they're still sick. They still have this ritual impurity in their skin, and he's saying just go to the place of verification. And then the text doesn't narrate this, but you could imagine them maybe going, okay, I know what the priest is going to say, but you've told me to do it, and so I'm going to have some faith, and I'm going to go do it. And Jesus praises that. He blesses it. He says, your faith operative in that way has been part of your healing. As they go to the place of verification, they're healed. It's on the way. How convenient for them. I mean, we so often are my place of my healing and the place of my verification have got to be the same place. Don't you dare heal me over there and then send me over there for the verification. Jesus is I'm going to make it so convenient for you. Go to the place of verification. The healing is going to happen. It's going to be, you're going to love it. You're going to be on your way. And you're going to be yes, I got that job done on the way to that place. It's going to feel so great and so efficient and such a wonderfully productive use of your day. Jesus helps them be so efficient in that, so convenient. And yet, just the turning back, just the returning, it's just such a burden. It's such a weight. It's such an inconvenience that even for people who have been given not just a miraculous healing, but a miraculous healing in an incredibly accessible and convenient way, are not able to find it in themselves to turn back and be inconvenienced and thank the one who healed them. We loathe, frankly, being inconvenienced. We really, really hate it. And it reveals this strong desire to avoid being inconvenienced, reveals over and over and over again our lack of care for other people, our lack of valuing of other people. The way that we simply are not taking other people, their experiences, their wins, their losses, their feelings, their emotions, their pains, their struggles into account. When we find that we have to interact with all these annoyingly inconvenient people on my way to getting the things that I want in my life. Just be honest with yourself and reflect for a second. Let's think about just these two things that this one man who turned back and thanked Jesus, the Samaritan, by the way, that's why Jesus says this foreigner, right? Jesus is not xenophobic. He's using pointed language of the world to describe how surprising it is that it's the Samaritan and not a Jewish leper in this context who would have come back and thanked a Jewish healer, right? Jews and Samaritans in this time are not buddies. They're not friends. So it's very shocking. And Jesus is just, again, he's not being xenophobic. He's not saying, oh, you foreigner, I want the Samaritans out. He's saying everyone else in this situation thinks that you are bad because you're a foreigner, and yet it's the foreigner who's the only one who came back to thank me. My own people wouldn't come back and thank me. This man, this surprising source of gratitude, what were those two things that he did to say thank you? Yes, the physical and vocal presence, but these two other things. He used the gift that Jesus gave him to express gratitude to Jesus immediately? How often do we use the gifts that we're given to turn right around and thank the giver of those gifts? When was the last time you got a gift and thought, how can I use this immediately to express my gratitude to you? This man showed up to Jesus and thanked him with a loud voice, a voice that was louder than the voice of his want. Is the voice of your thanksgiving louder or quieter than the voice of your want? Just think for a second. Which voice? You know these voices in yourself. You know where they live. You know what they sound like. Which voice is louder? The voice of your wants or the voice of your thanks? We hate being inconvenienced. The challenge here is that in order for grace to exist, in order for mercy to exist, in order for love to exist, in order for good things to happen to undeserving people, in order for problems to get fixed, in order for relationships to flourish, in order for any number of good and valuable things to happen in this world, somebody has to be willing to be inconvenienced. None of those things are convenient. Love is not convenient. Grace is not convenient. Mercy is not convenient. Sacrifice is not convenient. Seeing to it that goodness is done in an evil world is not convenient. So somebody's got to be willing to say, I will be inconvenienced so that these things can exist in the world. And you and I are not willing over and over and over and over again to be inconvenienced. And so none of these things are found in the world. But thank God that the God of the Bible is so different. Because the God of the Bible is a God who is willing to be inconvenienced. God is constantly going out of his way to see that grace is done in your life, going out of his way to be merciful to you, to take on extra unincurred cost to show love to you, to sacrifice in himself and his own life to provide for you. Because the God of the Bible is a God who is willing to be inconvenienced. And Jesus in this passage, as that God made manifest in this profoundly inconvenient time, is a God who's willing to be inconvenienced in this passage. Let's look at the very first verse, Luke 17:11. On the way to Jerusalem, he was passing along between Samaria and Galilee. You know, this whole story takes place in a context of Jesus, like being busy with something. Like he's going somewhere. He's doing something. And like he's doing something profoundly important and frankly profoundly terrifying and burdensome to him. Like he's going to Jerusalem to be crucified, and he's very aware of it. So every footfall that he takes is just one step closer to a place where he's going to endure something that we really can't even begin to imagine. So he's like got every right to just shut everything else out and say, I'm busy. I'm on a road. It's going somewhere. I'm not pulling off at that rest stop again. I'm not stopping for this. No. Stop asking, are we almost there? Just, I'm going somewhere. I'm busy with something. And yet on the way, he's walking by a village, and some people are standing out at the front of it. And he has the grace and the mercy to be inconvenienced along the way and stop and care for these people. Jesus is the one who is willing to be interrupted, to be stopped, to be inconvenienced so that he can take time to inject grace into the world, to inject mercy into the world, to inject love into the world, and to stop and take time to save people. This is not just true of this passage, of course. It's true of who Jesus is, because the Gospels are a record of Jesus being inconvenienced. They're a record of people upsetting his plans and the order of his day and ruining his meals and making it such that he doesn't have any place to sleep and his friends arguing with him over his teaching and people joining him when they think it's cool and abandoning him when they think it's not. Just over and over and over again. His life made profoundly more complicated by the fact that he's willing to stop and be inconvenienced by the needs of others. Because healing sick people is inconvenience, and giving grace to people who are burdened under the law is inconvenience, and being merciful to people who are beating themselves up with guilt is inconvenient, and saving people who need a helping hand is inconvenient. Dying is inconvenient. It's inconvenient whenever it happens. It's particularly inconvenient when you feel like I'm giving up my life for the sake of other people. That's particularly inconvenient. And it is exceedingly inconvenient to travel from heaven to earth. Earth is profoundly out of the way. It's out of the way in every way. In its character, in its quality, in its distance, in its location. It couldn't be any more out of the way. It's inconvenient for a deity to become a flesh-bound creature that's unable, especially in its earliest years, to even care for itself and meet its own needs. Thank God that Jesus is willing to be inconvenienced. The whole of the gospel could be told as a story of Jesus as just one person, the person who's willing to be inconvenienced. This is who God is. And God, in this season where we're supposed to be marking his coming, even now, we always think, oh my gosh, life would have been so much better for us if we could just see Jesus right now. We would have been like the 90% of the people in this passage who didn't return and thank Jesus. Let's just realize that. It's just true. This is the witness of the scripture. If Jesus were here present now, we would mostly be repeating the testimony of humanity that says we find it difficult to be inconvenienced such that we can welcome a God who's worthy to be welcomed, even in this season and in this time of welcoming Jesus in Advent now. We still are struggling to say, how can I make more space for Jesus? How can I give more of my life to Jesus? How can I trust him with more of my decisions and my hopes and my dreams? How can I view him more as an honored guest and not an inconvenienced little annoyance? Someone who's making these frustrating little demands of me. How can I welcome him and say yes to him in greater and deeper and more profound ways? This passage gives us one crucial insight for helping us understand how it comes to pass that someone becomes a great welcomer of God. And it has to do with seeing. It has to do with how seeing functions in the life of God and then how seeing functions in the life of a human. Let's look again at Luke 17, 14 to 15. The text says this. When Jesus saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were cleansed. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. This text shows us how God's right action and how humans' right response are both motivated by them seeing the things that they're supposed to see. God's mercy is motivated by his sight. The mercy of Jesus here is motivated by his seeing. He sees this people. And the word seeing here is not just communicated it's not just communicating a surface level sort of, he kind of glanced at them and there's those people over there. He saw them. He saw what was going on in their body. And he saw that isolated them socially. And he saw that impacted them psychologically. And he saw how that impacted their emotions daily. And he saw what that was teaching them about their spiritual life. He saw their whole predicament and situation. And so that seeing led Jesus to have mercy on them. Mercy grew up in the life of God for these people because of their sight. We also are supposed to see. And that seeing is supposed to create a right response in us, just like it is right for God, because of who God is, to see and be merciful. It is right for us, because of who we are, to see and be thankful. Thankfulness towards God, gratitude towards God, welcoming towards God comes from seeing. If we find that we are not thankful, it is tempting at first to say, well, I'm not thankful because I have nothing to be thankful for. That is false. Whenever we find that we're not thankful and welcoming God in gratitude and praise and thanksgiving, the answer about that, the explanation for that always is, I am blind to the things that I should be thankful about. The question always is, how could I go back and see again, see more clearly the things that God has done for me, such that I would have gratitude growing up in my life. We should be thankful and welcoming God, receiving God well, caring not just about what God can give to me, but about who God is as a good gift giver. Those things begin in thankfulness and gratitude, and thankfulness begins in seeing. Be thankful. Do you want to welcome God over the next 4 weeks? Be thankful. Does anybody care about what Jesus has done for them? Is anyone able to name the things that Jesus has done for them? Has anyone taken time to stop and look as we are overwhelmed by the crush of our needs and we're overwhelmed by the run of our mental life that says, here's the next thing and the next thing and the next thing? Does anyone just stop and say, God, help me to see? My mind is overrun by the next thing that I just want to gobble up. Just help me to stop for a moment and see what you've done for me. Because if I could see it again, I would be thankful and I would be better at welcoming you. Help me to see. And once we've seen, we should long for the voice of our thanksgiving to be louder than the voice of our want. It's okay to have a voice of your want. Jesus doesn't say that it was bad for any of these people to show up and ask him for something. Quite to the contrary, Jesus says explicitly in the Gospels that he wants people to be able to ask him for things. But he does think that when you get something, that the voice of your praise should be louder than the voice of your want. What would it look like for you in this season to just take some time to do some internal work and say, how loud is the voice of my wants versus the voice of my thanks? And what would it look like for you to commit to having a louder voice of thanks than a voice of your desire? If you want to welcome Jesus this Advent season, you should be thankful. And you should also be looking for meaningful ways to be inconvenienced. To be able to be inconvenienced by other people because you care about them. To be able to look in yourself and go, where am I just frustrated because I'm feeling like I'm being inconvenienced? And instead of using that as an opportunity to say, how can I fix those other people? To say instead, how can this learning about my frustration, how can this learning about my annoyance over being inconvenienced be an opportunity for me to say, this experience of inconvenience is an opportunity for me to express my care towards this person, my love for this person, my valuing of this person, to humble that frustration, to humble that sense of being inconvenienced, and instead welcome and receive that person, and to not just do that with people, but to do it with God. To say, God, I'm willing to be meaningfully inconvenienced by you to show you that I'm thankful for you and gracious and grateful towards you. The reality is that you want to be this sort of person. I mean, just like imagine for a second that you're like watching a movie, right? And you're watching this scene play out in a movie. You're watching a group of people being given an incredible gift, and then you watch the scene where everybody else goes off and gets busy with their stuff and one person comes back. Who do you want to be in that movie? When you watch that movie right now, who are you? Who are you? So often when we're in those moments, in those situations, our minds are full of justifications for why we're too busy to go back and say thank you. But when we step back from being in that situation and sort of watch our life play out, we gain immediate clarity about who we want to be. You want to be the person that when you watch the movie of your life, you came back and said thanks. Thank you for doing that for me. You actually want to say, thank you for doing that for me. You want it to be louder than the sound of the voice that you asked for it. You should want to be that sort of person. You do want to be that sort of person. Becoming that sort of person begins with seeing clearly what God has done for you and then resolving to thank God for it in a way that outstrips the way that we ask Him for stuff. So this is my question to you today. Does anybody here care that Jesus has healed you? Because in our passage, we saw a bunch of people who just really at the end of the day didn't care all that much. Do you care that Jesus has healed you? Do you care that Jesus has helped you? Do you care that Jesus has met your needs? Do you care that Jesus has been long suffering with you in the parts of you that frankly are frustrating and inconvenient? Do you care about the fact that Jesus keeps giving you good gifts even though you haven't really thanked Him yet for the ones He gave you last year? Like, does anyone care about any of that? And if so, then look in this season at what God has done for you. And resolve to be thankful for those things that God has done for you. And resolve to thank Him with a loud voice, and resolve to use those gifts that He has given you to look for an opportunity to be inconvenient such that you can say, thank you for the things that you have done in my life. Inconvenience me, God. How can I be meaningfully inconvenienced to show you how grateful I am to you? Show me how I can say thank you to you in a way that would make you feel blessed and loved and cared for. Not just as someone who gives me things that I want, but as a person that I want to know and be close to. And if we were to do that, we would be just one small witness over the course of human history of people who in one small time were given grace from God to welcome Him in a way that even began to approximate the welcome that God deserves. Amen.